All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutade Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachare Shatadane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaur Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This is a presentation on Upadesamrita, a work by Sri Rupa Goswami. Unlike his other works, Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu and Ujjwal Nilamani or Laghu Bhagavatamrita, this is a very, very short work. It's an instructive work, but it's also very, very short. It covers some of the material of Nectar of Devotion and some other material also. But it's a nice summary of the process of bhakti. So Srila Prabhupada actually translated and made a commentary on this work. Among other things, while he was translating other things, he also managed to bring out this translation. The name means the nectar of instruction. So the first several verses are, we can say, preliminary instructions for us, but also very valuable for us, having to do with things we have to control. That is the material urges that we have to control in order to practice bhakti properly. So this verse here enumerates the various vegas or urges that can disturb our devotional service. So we have Vacho Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udaropasta Vegam, Etan Veganyo Vishaheta Dira, Sarvam Apimam Privim Sasisyat. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So these, of course, are not direct bhakti. These are things we have to control, but also very necessary for our devotional service. In the items of surrender, we have accepting what is favorable and rejecting what is unfavorable. So these urges out of control are very unfavorable for us, and therefore we have to endeavor to control these things. So we can divide these things, there's a big list here of things, we can divide them in different ways. This, of course, is not an exhaustive list of all of the aspects of Maya that attack us, but it covers, we can say we can fit everything into these classifications. So Vacho Vegam means words or speaking. That's a verbal aspect of things. And we have Manasa Krodha Vegam, so mind has two things, desires and anger. These are, we desire things, and anger means the opposite, we don't like it. So we like and dislike things. So these are aspects of the mind. And then we have physical things, tongue, belly, and genital. So we have these three levels, the words, the mind, and the physical aspects. We often speak of mind, body, words. So we can analyze these things in this way according to the divisions of the list. Or we can think of mental, sensual, and physical. Mental, of course, is desire and anger, Manasa Krodha Vegam. Or Then we can take the senses like the tongue, the eye, the ear, the nose, and the skin. Now all these things aren't mentioned there. We just get the tongue mentioned, but we can take the tongue as representing all the different senses. And then we have the physical aspects of the body, like the voice, the genital, belly, anus, hands, feet, etc., which we call the action senses. So in any case, we get different aspects of our material body included here in the enumeration. Of course, here we can include the belly, udara. It's down here at the bottom here. The tongue, the belly, and the genital. Can we consider the belly a sense organ, or what? What do we call that? Generally, we don't include this in the action senses or in the knowledge gathering senses. 5 knowledge gathering senses and 5 action senses: the voice, the genital, the anus, and the hands and the feet. But we get the belly mentioned here, which is an added element. However, if we look in the Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes the stomach is also considered to be an element of sorts. And when in Canto 2 of the Bhagavatam, when it describes the universal form with the huge figure of with all the elements and things on his body, and then here it describes the belly of the universal form. When the universal form desired to take in food and drink, his location of the abdomen, the sense organs, and the form of the intestines and veins, their devatas, the rivers and oceans, and their sense objects, fullness from food and fullness from liquids, which take shelter of the sense organs and their devatas, appeared. So even the belly has its function, and it also has its devata, just like the eye has a devata, and it's good for seeing, and like that. So we also have the belly, and it also has its devata. So these Vegas that are listed here, if uncontrolled, lead to a lot of problems. A Vega means an urge. It pushes you. So if this is uncontrolled, we get a lot of problems. If we can control them, then we can live very peacefully. So this goes only not for spiritual life, but for, let's say, for material life also. If we cannot control our senses, we end up with a lot of problems. The more we can control our senses, the better we function within society, and the more successful we can be. So in any case, whatever we're doing in this world, we do have to control our senses. Of course, it's also a matter of how much we want to control the senses. If we're practicing spiritual life seriously, then we have to control our senses more than a person who is controlling to gain material goals. So we have more sense control than the normal person if we're practicing spiritual life. So where does sense control, where do we place this? Because we don't see in the discussion of bhakti, in the nectar of devotion, much mention of sense control. If you look carefully there in the angas of bhakti, we don't find the 4 regulated principles even. It's not even mentioned in the whole of the nectar of devotion, 4 regulated principles, but nevertheless very necessary. So what is the relation of these sense control elements to bhakti yoga? We see in karma yoga there are many rules for controlling the senses, and therefore it's considered a sin if we cannot control our senses. And if we control our senses, fine, then it is considered punya. And we have so many rules to engage ourselves in occupational duties, etc. The goal of which, of course, is material. We can progress materially by controlling our senses and following the process of karma yoga. In Jnana yoga, and also in Ashtanga yoga, there's also emphasis on sense control. And in Jnana they emphasize vairagya, which is detachment from everything. And therefore you have to do austerities and do vows, controlling your senses. Similarly, in yoga, we find the yamas and niyamas are there. And in the yamas, we have this austerity and controlling the senses as an element. So it's emphasized there as well. And of course, in Jnana, they also study the Vedas, etc., particularly Upanishads. And the goal is liberation from the material world. So to get liberation, obviously, you have to control the senses and get away from Maya. In the process of bhakti yoga, though, we don't get that emphasis. So Rupa Goswami discusses hearing, chanting, worshipping the deity, living in the holy dham, associating with the Vaishnavas, etc. as these are the main angas of bhakti. So he doesn't talk about controlling the senses, vairagya, etc. Rather the opposite, we say we do yukta vairagya. We engage our senses. We don't try to control them, we engage them in devotional service. So, on the other hand, he says, these items which are practiced in jnana and in karma yoga, these are not considered angas of bhakti. At the same time, he says that in the beginning, a little bit favorable. Vairagya is not an anga of bhakti. Detachment is not an anga of bhakti. Yoga and all these, not an anga of bhakti. But in the beginning, they can be a little helpful to us. The reason for this is that the process of bhakti itself produces the sense control. So as we advance in devotional service, all these items mentioned here, vacho vegam, manasa krota vegam, etc., get controlled as we perform the process of bhakti. So that's one reason why they're not emphasized so much. Yeah? On the other hand, we do see that the qualification for bhakti mentioned in the Bhagavatam is not too attached to things in the material world. If we're too attached, then we're going to have all of these vacha vegam, manasa krota vegam, all these urges are not going to be controlled. So we do have to have some minimum standard of sense control, but it's not emphasized so much as the positive angas of bhakti, like hearing and chanting. So when we have the within the first 20 angas of bhakti, we do have some things we don't do. Don't be controlled by lamentation, etc. And we should conduct ourselves in such a way that we have a sense of renunciation, doing everything for Krishna, not for ourselves. So there's an implication there that we do have to renounce and not be too attached to the material world. And we see in the 10 offenses, the last offense is not to be too materially attached. So there is a little bit of mention of renouncing sense gratification, etc., but it's not too explicit. But as I mentioned, we can also include these items in another way, that is within Sharanagati or surrender. We have the 6 elements of surrender. One is accepting what is favorable and rejecting what is unfavorable. So obviously uncontrolled senses and uncontrolled tongue, etc., are unfavorable. So therefore we can include it in that way. So nevertheless, though they're not mentioned directly, we do have to have these elements there for progress in bhakti. Otherwise we get very disturbed. So as I said, we have these elements of surrender, Atmanavedana, and other things as elements of Sharanagati. So rejecting the unfavorable and accepting the favorable are 2 of the elements there. Along with an Atmanavedana, the surrender of the self is the main element. But if we don't control the senses, then they will act very unfavorably for us. So we have to control the senses. So in that sense, this first verse is a preliminary for doing our activities of bhakti. Another way of looking at it is explained by Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Chaitanya Shikshamrita, and that is that we have the Mukhya Vidhi of bhakti, that are the primary elements of bhakti, like hearing and chanting, which increase our bhakti. Then we have gona vidhi, or secondary rules of bhakti, which don't create bhakti, but which assist it. So these are the rules of the varnashram system. So we have the rules for body, cleanliness of the body. Take a bath every day, brush your teeth, wear clean clothing. This is varnashramic rules of cleanliness. Wash your hands, wash your feet, etc. So these are rules of varnashram. The Vaishnavas also do that. But of course, simply by washing your hand and washing your clothes, you're not going to get bhakti. Everybody, clean people, Mayavadis also do the same thing. So it's not just cleanliness is going to create bhakti, but we follow those rules also. There are rules for concentration of the mind, engagement in different yoga processes, concentrating the mind, meditation, etc. within the varnashram system. There are rules for social interaction, samskaras and things for family life, marriage ceremonies, etc. Rules for conducting your occupational duties like Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahmana, Sudra, etc. So within all these secondary rules, the Vaishnava usually is following this along with his rules of bhakti, just to maintain his body and to operate within society. So they're called secondary rules. So within that we can also put all of these things like controlling the senses, etc. So they're not primary, but they support the main rules of bhakti. So if the rules of varnashram and controlling the senses are done by themselves, the end product is not spiritual, it's material, but at least it's advancement. You can get to sattva gun. So that's the progress over tamagun. So if you're in sattva gun, then you have less disturbance when you perform bhakti. So in that sense it's favorable. On the other hand, the goal of bhakti is not to be sattva gun. So therefore we cannot emphasize too much all of the sattva gun habits and rules. Otherwise we get stuck in sattva gun instead of advancing towards Krishna. Okay? So therefore these rules remain in a secondary role. So the mind, talk about manasa vegam, krodha vegam. So as two elements, but obviously anger is in the mind. So when we talk about manasa vega, krodha vega, for manasa we'll take desire, and then the other aspect of the mind is anger. So the material mind has a propensity to desire enjoyment, and that enjoyment is projected on objects in this world, and we'll think this object will give me enjoyment, for the eye or for the tongue or for the taste or for the touch or whatever. We'll get some enjoyment out of this. Of course, if we're a little bit more refined, then our mind can be attracted to liberation or siddhis. Liberation technically is not material. Siddhis are material, the yoga siddhis, but liberation isn't. But still it becomes an impurity for bhakti. So if you have a desire for liberation when you're doing bhakti, that becomes jnana misra bhakti. So that's not good. So that type of desire also has to be controlled or eliminated in the performance of bhakti. Anyway, the main, for most devotees, the main thing is the desire for enjoyment through the senses. If the desire is obstructed, then we get angry. And anger may be directed towards a person who's obstructing us or a thing that's obstructing us. So in the case of a person, then we get angry at that particular person. If it's a thing, then we'll have some anger towards the object. And And we may use harsh words or harsh actions in relation to that object or that person. So that's the result of the anger. Both of these are inactive in themselves, but they will lead to action. And the action will lead to karma. For the desire to get the object, or the krodha, to avoid something. Both of these actions lead to karma. So then we end up with another body again in the next lifetime. Yeah. So the two things go together, as we see in Bhagavad Gita also. First you meditate on sense objects, then you develop a desire for them, and then you get anger. So we have to control the senses. We have 10 senses. 5 of them are called the Gyanendriya, or the knowledge gathering senses. This is how we get our sensory data that go into the mind. So we use the tongue to taste. Then the mind says, oh, that is bitter, that is sweet, that is salty, that is sour. We use the eye to see objects. And then we see the object is white or black or colorful, or it's beautiful or ugly or whatever. Use the ear to hear things. We hear sounds, we hear words, sentences, meaning, music, etc. We get a lot of information through the ear. Really, fragrance is not such a big deal. You can't get a degree by using your nose from university, but you can by the eye and the ear, reading and studying and hearing. You can get a degree from college. So a nose for the human being is not such a significant Gyanendriya, knowledge gathering sense. But it is for the animals, like the dog. He's always smelling everything. And then touching. The skin is the organ, and sense of touch, hot, cold, smooth, rough, etc. This is a sense by which we get knowledge as well. So all of these sense organs give knowledge to us. So they also act to give enjoyment through that knowledge. We get impressions through the eye or the ear. That is nice, or that is beautiful, or that is wonderful, whatever. And this gives us some enjoyment. So it's a type of sense gratification also through the Gyanendriyas. Then we have the Karmendriyas, the action senses. The voice. We don't gain knowledge from the voice. We actually give knowledge or express something through the voice. It's not a sensory organ that picks up information. Rather, someone else can pick up our voice, but we're producing sound, information, etc. So it is usually used for speaking or to convey emotions. If it is uncontrolled, what will it do? Uncontrolled speaking. So we can speak about unspiritual things, material topics, etc. All sinful enjoyment, violence, all these things, not good, because then we'll get a tendency to do those things. But it may also be more philosophical to speak about impersonalism and karma yoga, etc. Then we get attracted to other processes. We develop desire to do other things other than bhakti. So in this way the voice also acts unfavorably. So we have to control the voice. The belly, as I said, can be treated as a karmendriya also for digesting food. So we can get nourishment in the body. But we can misuse this also, and we get overeating. Eating too much, the urge to fill the belly gets extreme, and we want to put more and more into the belly. So that's overeating. And if we do that, then obviously the effect is we get sickness, laziness, etc. It's not good for us. Dull mind, etc. So physically and mentally it affects us. So we have to control the belly. The genital, we have rules for control of sex life. We have the brahmacharya ashram. We have rules in grihastha life. And then we have renunciation in vanaprastha and sannyas. So there's control within the varnashram system of the genital also. Why? Because uncontrolled means we get too attracted to and attached to sense gratification. Then we cannot do spiritual life properly. So if the Vegas go out of control, then we get extreme attachment to material objects. We get a taste for those objects, we get attachment. And the 10th aparad is to be attached to these things in spite of hearing all the glories of the holy name. So then, if we commit that aparad, then how can we practice bhakti? Instead of going for prema, we'll go for enjoyment in the material world. So, therefore we have to control all these things. This is what that statement says. It lists the Vegas, manasa, krodha, vegam, etc. Then vishahita. One must control, the intelligent person has to control these urges. So the mental aspect, desire and anger, all the senses, the tongue, etc. And then the physical aspects, or the action senses, etc. Okay, so text 2. This is related to the first one because it shows the results of uncontrolled manasa, krodha, vegam, etc. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha jana sangashaloliam cha shadbir bhaktir vinasyati. So vinasyati means destruction. Bhakti gets destroyed by these 6 things. Overeating, over-endeavor, over-talking, rejection of rules, bad association, and unsteadiness destroy bhakti. So that's why we cannot have these uncontrolled vegas, the uncontrolled mind, anger, etc. Yeah, so this way the 2 verses are related. So we had 6 items mentioned in the first text, the vegas, 6 vegas. Here we have 6 things also which destroy bhakti. So we could kind of make a relationship between them in some sense. So we had desire, manasa vega, over endeavor for things. Krodha vega, rejection of rules. We don't like this, so we won't follow any of these rules. Unsteadiness in this lolium, unsteadiness in passion, like the senses in the tongue. Talking, prajalpa, and that's obviously a voice. Overeating, that's the second one here. Oh, first one, atyahara. Atyahara, overeating, obviously the belly, udara vega. And the genital association, janasangas is here, janasangas, association, bad association. So that's associated with women outside of marriage, then that's the result of not controlling the genital. So in this way we get a correlation between the 2. So one element was called prayasa, which means endeavor. So good endeavors are very good. We have to endeavor for bhakti, obviously. So this prayasa means endeavor for the wrong things. So we may have desires, strong desires for different material goals, and we have to undergo difficulties to attain those goals. For instance, for meditation, as a yogi, then you have to undergo great austerities and living in caves and fasting, etc. So even if we're trying to do karma yoga, that's also a wrong endeavor. And it also takes a lot of effort. So to do sacrifices is very time consuming. And you have to follow all the different rules. And if you break one of the little rules, no result. So it's also a big endeavor for a little result of going to Svargaloka. So this is prayasa. And simply working in family life to accrue things with no spiritual goal, again, is misguided endeavor. It's also prayasa, all of these things. So if the mind is not controlled properly, this is what happens. We go for things either according to Vedic rules of jnana and Ashtanga yoga or karma yoga, or don't even follow any yoga. We try for goals in this material world. So that's uncontrolled mind. One of the mentioned items here is niyamagraha, which niyama means rules. Agraha can mean two things. Graha can mean attachment. Agraha means non-attachment, to reject the rules. So we reject all the rules for controlling the senses, all the rules for bhakti or any other process, karma yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga. Why? Out of frustration. We don't want any control over ourselves at all. So that's the anger. We have to discipline ourselves not to get into the angry mood. Lolya means unsteadiness. So if we get that prayasa and we start endeavoring for these various goals of liberation or material enjoyment in this life or the next, then we cannot control our senses, and we become very unsteady in our practice. And we have jiva vega, that is the tongue speaking. And the result of uncontrolled tongue, of course, is that we end up with all sorts of attachments and other uncontrolled senses. And then we commit aparats and worship devatas or go for liberation. Okay, so that, what does prajalpa mean? Means useless talk. Yeah. So one type of useless talk is, we can speak scripture, but with the wrong purpose. So if we use scripture to defeat other people by our learning or our intelligence or our logic, then that is considered to be useless. So one of the angas of bhakti in the second set of 10 is, don't study too much books. Don't study too many books. So we shouldn't, even if they're bhakti granthas, devotional scriptures, if we're studying simply to defeat other people or impress other people by our learning, then it is considered useless. So that's not the goal. Of course, the other is that we could study scriptures and then speak on wrong subject matters, karma, jnana, materialism, science, or anything. So if we simply get studied and then talk about these things, it's also useless. So therefore we do have to control the tongue. If it's scripture, then we have to have the proper goal in it. And if it's not scripture, or it's not bhakti scripture, then again useless to talk about other processes like karma yoga as the main process, and this is useless talk. We cannot talk about sense gratification, we cannot talk about liberation, it all becomes useless for us. We saw in the story of Gopakumar, the Brahmana. He was wandering around and then he went to various places, and one of the places was Varanasi. But when he got to Varanasi, then they were all talking about liberation, etc. Eventually he got a little sick of that. He gave it up and just walked away from it because it wasn't very interesting. So too much talk of liberation again is prajalpa. So that tendency to talk on the wrong subject matters is from Vacho Vega, tendency to speak. Everybody likes to speak. And of course, in a very bad way, we don't control our tongue, and we end up with sadhuninda, offending the Vaishnavas. Thus becomes aparad. Atyahara, overeating. It can also mean overaccumulation of anything, but it can particularly overeating. Ahara means to eat, so ati means too much eating. This is obviously related to that first vega, the udara vega, the stomach vega, to fill up your stomach more and more. So that's the atyahara is the result of that. And as if you do overeat, as the result was, you can get sick, you can get lazy, inattentive, etc., and therefore you cannot practice bhakti properly. So, has to be controlled. Jana sangha. So, this means, of course, a relation with people in the wrong way. So to associate with the wrong people, that is gyanis, karmis, materialists, sinful people, or to associate with women illicitly, illicit sex life. So that type of sangha useless. So that illicit sex life, of course, is upastavega, uncontrolled genital. So this again will lead to more and more material attachment, and therefore we cannot succeed in spiritual life. So the negative things were dealt with. Now we get some positive things. Utsaha nischara dharyat tat karma pravartanat sango chaga satoverte shadbir bhakti prasidyati. Bhakti is perfected by these 6 items. Bhakti is nourished by enthusiasm, conviction, gravity, following rules previously rejected, giving up bad association, and following proper conduct. So we control the Vegas, then we end up with some positive things. So, we had the desire in the mind, manasa vega, and then over-endeavor, prayasa, for material things. So we can control that, we can develop good conviction, or nischaya, in terms of bhakti. If we have too much material desires, then that gets weakened. So therefore the result of controlling the desires in the mind will give us good conviction in the process of bhakti, which is very necessary for continuing the process. Krodha vega was the anger propensity, and we reject the rules. That was called niyamagraha. So the opposite of that is we follow the rules. So the karma pravartana, we follow rules, action, etc., in order to progress in devotional service. Jiva vega was the urge of the tongue, which can lead to unsteadiness, or laulyam. That's the taste one. And if we control the tongue, then we can have proper conduct, which is called sadvriti, following the rules properly. Vachovega was the voice, and if we can't control the voice, we end up with prajalpa, talking or criticizing, etc. And if we control it, then we become dharya, very grave. We don't speak on frivolous subject matters. We had the udara vega, the belly, and overeating atyahara was the bad result. If we control ourselves and we're not lazy, we can become enthusiastic for bhakti. And the last one was upastavega, the genital, and this led to bad association, illicit sex life, etc. And the good result is we get good association. Instead of bad association, we have good association by avoiding the bad association. Okay? So utsaha, that was the, here. Oh, down here in the bottom here, utsaha. All of these are favorable to bhakti. Utsaha means enthusiasm. We dedicate ourselves to bhakti, and very positively with the optimistic attitude, we follow all of the rules and regulations of bhakti. And in the process of doing that, we become indifferent to other processes like karma, jnana, yoga, etc. So this is a counteraction to the laziness we have from atyahara. Nishchaya was this firm conviction that we have that bhakti is the only path. So we can only develop that conviction if we don't endeavor for material things. So instead of directing ourselves to material things, we have to direct ourselves to spiritual things. Dharya, gravity. So we're always serious about practicing devotional service, and therefore the opposite was this prajalpa, talking about frivolous things. So karma pravartana is following activities or regulated activities, rules. Observing vidhi and nishad. Vidhi means the rules, nishad means don't do this. So we follow the scriptures. We follow the angas of bhakti, hearing, chanting, remember, etc. And we avoid the actions and the philosophy of karma, jnana, and yoga, etc. And in this way we doing the opposite of niyamagraha, rejecting the rules. Sangachaga. Avoid the bad association, which means avoid illicit contact with women, or avoid contact with people who illicitly contact women, avoid association with persons controlled by women, associate with non-devotees, avoid association with non-devotees, mayavadis, atheists, pretenders, all these materialists, etc. And so that's called jana sangha, sangha tyaga, which is something we should do in order to avoid jana sangha, bad association. So these are the 6 items there. Oh, one more. Shadvritti. Vritti means occupation. So shad means the proper occupation or pure occupation. So we support ourselves with whatever is necessary, but we should follow rules. We should not have a sinful occupation. And of course in the varnashram system you have a particular varna and you have a particular ashram. So you follow the rules of the varna and ashrama. That is shadvritti. So the devotees of course are beyond that, but most people are not renounced, so we're living in society, so therefore we have to follow rules and regulations of ashram and varna if we have one. So this will contact the unsteadiness and lack of sense control. So if we have all these items, then we can practice bhakti very nicely. Okay, that covers 3 verses. Any question there?
We say always woman, but you refer also to men.
Oh, the opposite, yeah. If it's a woman, then she can't loosely associate with men.
Women are the sinful people and men. Men are the right and women they're all sinful. Maybe we should include association with women or association, illicit association with women or men.
Yes.
Or the woman and men.
Yeah. Oh, so usually in the scriptures we'll say it takes the man's point of view, but then it's the opposite also. It's not that we can't just blame the women, so that the men also can be in the same category. And so if it's a woman devotee, then she has to avoid the men who are illicitly connecting, etc. So we can just reverse the words for each item.
Worth mentioning.
You could say illicit association with the opposite sex.
Yes, yeah.
Another question. From the Mahabharata we read that Bhima was a voracious eater. He is a devotee. He was a voracious eater. For example, he couldn't follow the Ekadashi.
Yeah, so was Madhvacharya.
So was Madhvacharya. So how do we understand this in the context of pure? Because these are the associated.
Even Lord Chaitanya was. He got criticized for eating sugar, and the ants were on the floor. So, yeah.
Also, sometimes in Harinam say you meet up to your neck, Akanta Bhojana.
Yeah.
When you go to the fish, it's eating more and more.
Yeah.
Eat as much as you can. Of course, you understand.
So we have general rules that should be followed in general. Then we will have exceptional things, exceptional cases. So for one person, then generally we don't overeat. If you overeat every day, then you're going to end up with a lot of problems. And you get sick and whatever, physical and mental problems result from that. So if it happens once in a while during feast or whatever, then that's not such a problem. So it's a general rule. And then we have, it's a general rule for everyone, but then we have exceptional cases that people can't eat a lot and nothing happens to them. So Madhvacharya could eat tons of bananas because he was like Hanuman, and nothing happened to him. He was strong, very, very strong. He could defeat anybody in wrestling. So he could eat and eat and eat and still wrestle, whatever. Same with Bhima. So it didn't affect them at all. So generally we have to look at qualification. If your qualification is you can only eat so much, then that's you have to set your limits there. Someone can eat more, then okay, fine, then he can eat more. But that for him it's not overeating in one sense. So therefore it's according to qualification. So we have what is called guna and dosha. Good quality, bad quality. But we can't apply the same good quality, bad quality. This is good or this is bad. The same rule to everybody, because everybody's differently qualified. Okay? So for a person doing karma yoga, things are good and bad. This is sin, or this is good, this is bad, etc. But someone who's jnana yoga, different set of qualifications. But doing bhakti, the good and bad are different again. Okay? In fact, all the karma yoga is bad for the devotee. He's doing bhakti, so then he takes everything else as the jnana is bad, karma is bad. But they're good qualities to follow the karma yoga qualities within karma yoga. But then, if you're in jnana yoga, you reject them also, and if you're in bhakti, you reject jnana and karma. So, according to your qualification, then the nature of things changes. You know, good and bad, whatever, like that. So even within devotees, we can say that these rules may change slightly. What is overeating for one is not overeating for another. Of course, these are exceptional cases also, because Hanuman is special, Madhvacharya is special, Lord Chaitanya is special. So they're beyond the rules in any case.
So can we say that everybody has to find his own balance?
Definitely, but some people are incapable of doing that. They'll say my own balance is to eat eat more and more, but then the result is he suffers because of that. So sometimes we have to take the advice of scripture or devotees to find out what is proper for our particular level.
The devotee can advise the devotee.
Yeah.
And also, Maharaj, worth mentioning, maybe you should have mentioned that the senses of the tongue, stomach, and the jnana are in a line.
Well, yeah, obviously all of these things are related to each other, all these Vegas. So we have the Jiva Vega, the mental, and the desire, and the anger, and then we get the belly and the genital, all of these things. So they're all related to, if we start with the tongue and we end up with the genital, so they all get agitated one after the other. Yeah? So they're all related to each other, and imbalance on one will lead to imbalance on the other also.
Just with association with non-devotees, what's a good test? Because sometimes it can be quite subtle. Like if we're giving our association, or if we're taking their association, what's a good way of knowing when, if we're preaching or somewhere like Govardhana where you're in contact of them with non-devotees and you build relationships?
Yeah.
What's a good way to know when we should keep going with it, or if we're being effective, especially if we're not if we don't know how strong our bhakti is?
Oh, well, I suppose in many cases we have to be a little introspective and just see, have we got any material desire in that relationship? And if it becomes strong, then we have to do something about it. So, in one sense, in the Vedic system, there would be systems of control, so the association wouldn't get close in any case. But modern world is quite different, so therefore we get closer association. And therefore the individual has to be a little bit careful about how they associate, otherwise it may get too close, and then we end up with problems. So if we have a little bit of doubt, then we have to consult somebody else and see if it's, we're going beyond the limit. But it's a danger in any case, the association with others. So somehow or other it has to be regulated, but in the modern world there's less regulation than previously, so it becomes more of a problem. And even previously, we could say, because it was regulated, we didn't have to be so introspective about it. But now we have to rely a lot on our own analyzing ourselves to see where we're at, because the rules are not so well defined nowadays in terms of association. Right? Okay. Hare Krishna.